Hello coaster lovers. So all the coaster enthusiasts in the world have been to a lot of parks, and that means they travel a lot. But some parks that they just planned to go to just didn't work out as planned, so they make up by driving by it. I've driven by a few parks, and I'll talk about those in today's video. So this is the top 10 roller coasters I've seen, but not ridden. Welcome to King's Coasters. If you're new here and at least driven by 3 parks, King's Coasters will be for you, and consider taking a moment to subscribe to the channel. You're the reason why I make these videos, so bringing some support to the channel helps and it makes me motivated. So before we begin the list, there are 2 honorable mentions, and both of these coasters are defunct. The first one of these 2 mentions is Firehawk of Vekoma Flying Dutchman. This ride has some history. It originally opened in 2000 at Geauga Lake as X-Flight, then the park closed in 2007. But in 2006, it closed for good, along with Steel Venom. Steel Venom moved to Dorney Park in 2008, but X-Flight was relocated to Kings Island in 2007 as Firehawk. This ride looks like fun. I've heard it was one of the best Vekoma flyers out there until Fly opened, because this ride looks wild, especially the loop that has the same intensity factor as any pretzel loop on a B&M flyer. The layout is also pretty solid, but one thing that I have to keep in mind that it's pretty loud. Just listen to the lift hill, it sounds like nails hitting metal. Anyways, this ride looks amazing. The next honorable mention is a coaster that I have done a video on. It's T3 at Kentucky Kingdom. I want to throw a mention here because it's one of the worst SLCs out there, along with one in Colorado, which we'll talk about the park it's in a little bit later. I'm glad that this coaster was gone because nobody liked it. And you know the part I talked about in SLC in Colorado? I'm literally going to talk about the park right now with Twister 2, a wooden twister. If you do not know, when I was young, like 6 or 7, I used to live in Colorado. I used to live near Denver, and every time I go to Denver, I always pass by Elitch Gardens on I-25, and I always saw Twister 2. And I know it's Twister 3, but I still call it Twister 2. This coaster is very reminiscent of the other Twister, this one being at Canobie's. Actually, when I first heard of Twister, I thought it was a clone of Twister 2, but turns out I was wrong. This looks like a very rough ride, but it looks great. This layout is actually surprisingly long for a wind coaster, and just like the name, it twists over itself a lot. This looks like the best ride in the park. It's either that or Sidewinder, an aero shuttle loop. This ride looks underrated, because I've heard on the drops you get some actual legit airtime. This is also the oldest coaster on the list that I have seen. The last time I've seen it was in 2016. You can also find this type of coaster at 2 other parks. Those parks are Frontier City in Oklahoma and Blackpool Pleasure Beach in the UK. It also used to operate at parks such as Kings Island, Camden Park, and more. Sidewinder looks like a lot of fun, but it doesn't look the smoothest ride out there. Going from a cold state to a hot state, I saw this coaster at a hotel when I visited Disney World in 2019. That coaster is Kraken, a B&M floorless. This definitely looks like one of the best floorless coasters out there, because this ride looks awesome, especially with the recent repaint. It looks a lot more fresh than the old color scheme I've seen in 2019. It looked pretty old and faded, and now it looks great. The first drop has a fun free-falling sensation, and you can find that on most of the floorless coasters out there, like Rougarou. That is a great example. This is definitely better than Rougarou for sure. This ride looks like a fun time. And speaking of B&M, this coaster I have talked about before. It looks like a wild ride. It's Kumba, a B&M sit-down. If you have seen the video I have uploaded last week, most of that will be applied here. The layout is filled with inversions and quick transitions in a secluded setting in Busch Gardens, Tampa. I like the setting and the color scheme. It's because it has a natural vibe to it. If you have a roller coaster in the trees or any forest, I will be riding it when I visit. Kumba looks very intense, but sadly, it's 30 years old. It's almost near the end of its service life. But I really hope there's at least a few more years, or they can just pull an Islands of Adventure or an Alton Towers and retrack it, and that will add a few more years into its lifespan. Going to the Bluegrass State, this coaster I have seen a little bit of. It's Lightning Run, a Chance Hyper GTX. My main question is, why aren't there more of these GTX coasters? Because this coasters look so dang good. My guess is the cost. These rides are pretty expensive. There's one opening in 2024 in Arizona, so that's good, but it will be very different from Lightning Run. But I'll talk about that coaster in a future video. Lightning Run looks amazing. The layout has a lot of airtime hills, quick transitions, a great drop, and a glossy smooth track. And honestly, it looks like a mini Magnum, but I'm not saying this ride is bad at all means. It's because the track looks like Aero Track. This ride is a powerhouse. So going back to Busch Gardens, Tampa, this ride I have also talked about before. It's Montu, a B&M invert. I've heard this is the best B&M invert out there. so I have really high expectations, and I see why it's the best. It's because it has a lot of trenches, intense maneuvers, and a pretty placement, but they definitely need to redo the color scheme. It does not look good at all. This is also one of the most recent coasters I have seen, which was July 13th, and actually I took a little trip to Florida. It's because of something I'll talk about in a future video, and during that day, we had a lot of free time, so I drove by Busch Gardens. Montu looks like fun. So going from Florida to Iowa, this is a park I drove by on New Year's Eve. That coaster is Monster, a Gerstlauer Infinity. This coaster looks very good. I mean, look at the coaster at night. It looks gorgeous with the KCL like package, but unfortunately, I did not see the coaster at night. I only saw the Ferris wheel, the SNS Shot Tower, and Storm Chaser at night, but I saw it in the afternoon the next day. The versions look floaty, and the transitions are pretty nice. So going back to Florida, this is a coaster that I also saw in a hotel in 2019. It is Mako, a B&M Hyper. Just like Montu, I've heard this is the best B&M Hyper because the airtime has a lot of sustained floater. If you know me, you know that I love floater airtime. That's why I praise Diamondback a lot. But Mako looks like it's up there with Diamondback as one of the best B&M Hypers. The layout is also pretty solid, just camelback after camelback. You also have a little twister section at the end. It goes over a lagoon which looks pretty. Mako looks amazing. Now we're going to be talking about RMC for our last two coasters. Number 2 is one that I was planning to ride, but it didn't happen. It's Storm Chaser, an RMC beast. This looks like an aggressive little ride. It is only 100 feet tall, but it looks super violent, especially with the trick chalk double up at the end. And speaking of weird elements, if you're looking for them, this is a ride for you. It was planning to have a tip out corner, but it didn't happen. They replaced it with the Helix. Storm Chaser looks super aggressive. One of the most aggressive RMCs out there. It might have the same level of aggressiveness as Iron Gwazi, which is the number 1 coaster. This coaster looks absolutely godly because this ride has a lot of ejector and zippy transitions. You can really see that in the death roll. That looks wild. The layout is also really good as well. It has quick inversions, airtime, and fast transitions. But the only thing that I don't really like about this coaster is the name. A Gwazi is a creature with the head of a tiger and a body of a lion. When Gwazi got RMC'd, they gave it a lazy name, Iron Gwazi. They also slapped a crocodile theme on it. So the name and theme just doesn't make sense, but I'll switch to positive. And just like Montu and Kumba, this is one of the rides that I've seen on July 13th. I am absolutely obsessed with this coaster, and I'm definitely grabbing a ride on this coaster when I visit Busch Gardens. This easily tops the list of the top 10 coasters I have seen, but not ridden. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. And it would be amazing if you subscribe to the channel, and you can post your thoughts about my list in the comments below. I've driven by some parks like Busch Gardens, Elitch Gardens, SeaWorld Orlando, Kentucky Kingdom, and others. And if you are satisfied with this video, I got you. Here's a video for you to watch. And make sure to keep that adrenaline pumping, and thanks for watching.